Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. We are here with friend of the show, author, explorer, complete cool human being who's on the opposite end of the earth as me, which we were talking about, Mr. Kevin Holt. How are you, my friend?
Hey, good morning or good afternoon for you, I guess. I'm well.
Nice.
You're
We were just
broadcasting from
telling.
California now, yeah?
I am. I zipped out here. My daughter was spending some time with the grandparents, so we shot out from Hawaii, spent a couple of days out here, and did some
hmm
wine tasting and yeah, it's beautiful out here. I forget what it's like to be out here being, isolated in the middle of the Pacific.
So wait, where in California are you?
Northern California, up in Sonoma area.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah, right
wine
up.
country, huh?
Yeah. We went
Yeah.
today. We went today to a. There's so many up here. We drove like 20 minutes from my wife's house, and there's like a little wine tasting place. Get a couple glasses of wine, some cheese, 50, $60. It's
Wow.
pretty. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. It is pretty awesome.
I still never been to California. The closest I got was Vegas, which we talked recently. I was flying through Vegas to come back home here to Bali. And I gotta be honest, I hated Vegas. I thought it was the most absurd place I've ever been to because you think about it from high level, it's the desert. You've got
Right.
all these giant lights, gaudy things in the middle of the desert. It's like 120 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. And so you're just stuck inside in the AC. So you're using even more power. And it's like
Right.
all powered by the Hoover. We use, I guess there's solar power now, but it was the Hoover Dam powering all this stuff. And it just seemed like insane the amount of power consumption, and it just made this artificial city in the middle of the desert.
Yeah. Like how talk about something that's unsustainable. It's just
Yeah. And then
it's mind blowing.
Lake Mead, which is what powers the Hoover Dam, is like almost bone dry because we went to the
Yeah.
Hoover Dam and you could actually see the stone where the water used to be, and it's all bleached white, where so you can see the water slowly going down. And they're saying that if it doesn't rain enough in the next couple of years, there won't be enough water in the lake to actually spin the turbines at the dam. And then you're like, all right, well, what happens to Vegas then? Because all these people are going to just melt in the heat because you won't be able to power AC anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
game over for those guys, I think. It becomes the new gold rush, or it follows the path of the 49ers. It's just going to be this empty town. Like how can you live out there without power? There's no way.
No. And then I realized the Hoover Dam doesn't power just Vegas. It powers like across 7 states. I'm like, holy crap,
Yeah.
this is not sustainable at all.
You know what I wonder? Sometimes I wonder, like, if you look at the way in which we've dammed up the rivers and changed the course, the way the water runs through the United States, like that has to change the environment throughout the United States. If the Colorado River continued to flow the way it did, then you would continue to have the ecosystems along that river. And once you dam it up, you fundamentally change the environment below the river, up the river. It seems like maybe that is what climate change is at least a factor of climate change is us damming and changing the rivers.
Yeah. And this human concept or the desire we have to control our nature, which has brought a lot of boons, but maybe we're altering the course of things in critical ways, as you mentioned. We can't know.
Yeah.
We're control freaks, I suppose.
We are control freaks. Like what do you
Yeah.
think that is about us? Like what is it about us that allows us to want to fundamentally change or be in control? Do you think it's the fact that we know we're going to die, so we're trying to control the time that we have?
Yeah, I think it's just fear. I think it's just a way to make sense of the world, and if the little bits of control you can exert over your world make you feel more secure, I suppose.
Okay, so that
Yeah.
leads me to a really great question I want to ask you. This idea of us wanting to control stuff. Do you think that that's how we came up with like the idea of science? Like I've been running this idea in my head lately, like,
Hmm.
it seems to me that science is the glass spheres that held the heavenly bodies in ancient Greece. Science is the vehicle used by bankers to transport trillions of dollars of unfunded liabilities. Science to me is becoming this word that is just false. It seems like science to me is it seems to me that we are seeing that science isn't true. And I don't know how to square that. Like the more that I think about science, the more that I think about a handful of people controlling knowledge that may or may not be true.
Yeah, that's a big can of worms. I don't know, science, I think, in my opinion, we have to sort of put a dividing line somewhere across the disciplines, right? So it seems like there is a science that is concerned with the study of physical things and really just measuring and observing things, more like concrete, I suppose, like
Right.
world based. And then there's this other science that's, for example, the social sciences. To
Right.
what extent can you say a social science is a science? Because you're not, a lot of times you're not measuring physical things, you're measuring like behavior or evolution of culture and things like that. So it's a little less tangible. I don't know. I think initially science was nothing more than that, was like observation of the natural world and just us trying to get an understanding of this weird subjective reality that we appear to be living in. But then at some point it became culty, I suppose is the word, where people are willing to die on the cross of science just as, damn, my headphones keep falling out. Die on the cross of science just as they were on the Christian cross, you know. And I'm not sure when that split happened. If it's been more prevalent recently because people have sort of lost, faith in faith or in established religions, and
Yeah.
there's a void there. And then that void's been now filled with politics and almost irrational belief in certain science.
Yeah, that's a great point. It seems to me that you're right. There should be a dividing line between the soft sciences and people that are actually practicing, observing, and then trying to quantify things. Sometimes
Hmm.
I just wonder, like, do we really have the ability to, I think I lost you there. Sometimes I
Yeah.
just wonder if we really have the ability to understand our environment and make up and make decisions about what we see. Like, how can it not be subjective? How can we really quantify what it means to be to have the human experience? I think we're just trying so hard to do this stuff. We end up pigeonholing ourselves and making things worse sometimes.
Yeah, I didn't know how far down this rabbit hole you want to go, but yeah, if we're gonna further go into what physical science is, I mean, it's also belief based because, I
Mm,
mean, little background. I tried to major in physics when I was
okay.
19, and I love physics. I'm terrible at the math of physics, but I love the theoretical, conceptual part. And early on, I kind of realized we don't know anything
Yeah.
because they kept revising their view of the world. And then you look at the things that we have to measure the world, and they're always suggesting, or they're more and more suggesting, that we don't know what the fundamental particles of the world are because they keep finding new things, like new smaller things. First it was the atom, then it was the electron, and then it was quarks, and then it's hadrons, and they got the hadron collider. And I feel like every couple of years they find something else that they didn't know about before. And now you got the string theory, which says everything is vibrating strings. And if you it's so difficult to reconcile what science says with what we see, right? Because we see things as solid and tangible, but science says exactly the opposite. There's nothing as solid or tangible at all, and there's nothing there. And it's all energy, like going around chaotically and combining to form things that we use our senses to get information from and interpret. So it's like everything is energy, but our senses give us certain information to make it appear solid. So even that, like the physical science, like we're studying our world and the earth and all these things, and you're like, well, what are we actually even looking at? Because everything is filtered through our senses anyway. And it sounds crazy, but like I can't even say for sure that this thing really is this, right? It's
Yeah.
just I'm getting information from my eyes and my hands about it, but I don't know if that information is accurate.
Yeah. And I could see the same thing, but I could see something totally different.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
not only physical things, but like also we were talking about reality also being subjective, and you can see it. This might be over people's heads; they might not be ready to like think about the world this way. But like, here's an example that I think everyone can relate to, where information is now pretty much belief based because
Mm.
the way social media works, the algorithms filter out what you like. So if you are on one political side or another or in a third one or whatever, you're going to consume information that's going to meet what you enjoy. And then that's going to be kind of like all you see. So one event can be spun two or three different ways. Like there can be one event in the world, so and so, like we're in a recession. And then another person will spin that exact same of circumstances saying, oh, we're actually in a controlled contraction done by our wonderful leaders. So you don't even see the world the same way. And that's just one example of it.
That's a great example. It makes me wonder. I think it opens up a third possibility. I think it opens up the possibility of being able to see it from a third person point of view. Because I bet you yourself and everybody listening to this knows somebody that's like, oh, I love Donald Trump. The other person's like, oh, I hate Donald. I'm a hardcore Democrat. But if you can sit in the middle, you can see both sides of it. The same way that you could see two different people in two different echo chambers watching the same event and coming up with a different idea of what that event is. On
Mhm.
some level, might that give us a clearer picture of how to solve the problem? But the person can sit back okay, like this, the same way that you can see a friend in a relationship that's in a bad relationship because you're on the outside, you go, that's never going to work with that girl, man. You guys are a mess together, but they can't see it because they're in it. The same way we can now look at society, oh, well, these guys hate these people and these people hate these people. Shouldn't that at least give us, guys like us or people watching from a third person point of view, a clearer perspective of what might help solve the problem?
Yeah, that's a great point. And then, of course, raises the question, how do you get to that perspective? How do
Mm.
you extract yourself from the complicated web of your belief systems and perceptions, which have caused you to be in it, quote unquote? So you're in it. How do you get out of it? And there are a number of ways, which I'm sure we can talk about, that I think help. Being the observer, meditation, yoga
Mm.
helps, breath work kind of thing helps,
Yeah.
psychedelics can help.
Right.
Sometimes it's like life trauma. I mean, you write about it in your book where
Yep.
with the death of your son, it kind of just like took you out of things and you had this almost like divine oneness experience where you're sort of observing everything from on high. So those things can do that. But the only deliberate ways I know of are, like I said, meditation and psychedelics. They really help with that.
Yeah, and those two are their own form of tragedy. Whether they're self-inflicted or slipped into you or trauma based, like it is the tragic event or the trauma event. And you know what, this kind of brings us full circle to like the initiation rituals in any kind of in the majority of cultures is an initiation ritual, especially like in the Native Americans or the South American shamanism or even some of the Eastern traditions where you go into a cave and it simulates the rebirth, or you dance until you drop, or you get beaten. Even in modern day gangs, like have to get jumped into a gang, you have to get beaten up. In some ways, that's getting beaten up or going to live in a cave is the same way as having the scales fall from your eyes, or it represents a new way to see the world, the same way we were talking about. It's kind of
Yeah.
interesting to think about it like that.
Yeah. It's these shocks. It's almost like we're asleep, and then
Yeah.
there's some kind of external shock, either deliberate or accidental, that just kind of like jolts you out of it, and you go, "Oh, okay." And then you take this outside view, and you go, "What the hell am I doing? What have I been doing? And what is this world? Is it even real? Who knows?" And then you might go insane, maybe not. I don't know, but I'd say going insane is a good thing because the world is crazy. So if you go insane in a crazy world, it means you're sane, I suppose.
Yeah, I saw a good video graphic one time, and it was like, in a world where everyone's crazy, the sane person is running towards the criminal. or something along those lines.
Yeah.
And it was like, it was really well done. It makes
Yeah,
me,
and there's a fine line between a shamanic type person and an insane person. And I think that in old times they used to almost revere
yeah,
epileptics and the schizophrenics because they thought they had some divine power. And sometimes I wonder about the schizophrenics, like that disease in itself, if it isn't, I don't know, I'm just talking out of my ass here right now, but I wonder if they're sometimes getting too much information where we have these conscious filters of our world, and maybe they're getting like everything. So they're hearing voices, but they're not making it up. They're just taking it in more. And that's probably like impossible to handle.
absolutely. You know, they've done, I'm sure you've read about some of the studies where they, in epileptic people that have it bad, they'll cut the corpus callosum, which is that thin thread that, so you have two hemispheres in the brain, and there's like a long twisted, it's not a tube, but it's like a huge piece of fiber that runs between those two hemispheres of the brain, and it sends information back and forth. And people that have epilepsy really bad, they've cut that corpus callosum, and it dramatically stops all the seizures, and it somewhat cures the people. It doesn't really cure them, but it really helps the people that have had bad epilepsy and can't move through their days. They've done some interesting experiments. Well, after they have severed the corpus callosum, they'll ask people to use their right hand to draw what they wanted to be when they were a kid. And the right hand will draw like a fireman. And then they'll ask them to use their left hand in the same question, and it'll draw like a race car driver. You know, and they'll
Whoa.
ask them like, why did you draw a race car driver if you want to be a fireman? And they'll be like, that is a fireman. So they've
What?
done some, yeah, they've done some incredible experiments on that. And it also makes me think that, you know, the right hemisphere of the brain tends to be the one that understands the different ideas and is not so much the analytical part, but more the one that gets the big picture of things. So someone that has epilepsy, they would be revered because they would be seeing the world differently. They would have a whole nother view. So if you talk to somebody, it's possible that they may have had answers that the other people didn't have. And that could be another reason why. It's pretty fascinating to think about.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I also think it's because it's so close to dying, I guess. They suddenly have these
Ooh,
attacks and they're seizing up.
yeah.
So that's the shamanic way, right? The shaman is supposed to be someone who walks the line between life and death. And I think most historically, most of the people that become shamans, they do so after some kind of near-death experience where they really go to the brink and they sort of now see the spirit world to some degree, or at least claim to be able to.
Yeah. Yeah, and that brings me to another idea. I was just thinking about psychedelics the other day, and I was thinking that I think we've all seen the images of people. I'll just use psilocybin for this particular example. Have you seen the example of people that like take psychedelics and they go in the MRI and it shows their brain scan, and they take someone who doesn't take psychedelics and they show their brain scan and where it lights up, and the imagery is, it shows the connections between the brain, but it's sparse. However, when
Hmm.
someone has taken a large amount of psilocybin, they put them in the MF or in the MFRI, and the whole brain center is lit up. And what they explained was when you take psychedelics, what's happening is it overrides the default mode network. And so it
Yep.
connects the brain in different types of ways. And that would mean that you are able to process visual information in Broca's area, and you are able to process speech in the visual cortex, and that's what would give you the form of synesthesia and stuff. And if you do psychedelics long enough, we know from modern brain papers that people have written that once you build the connection between different brain centers, those connections tend to stay there. So if you do enough psychedelics, wouldn't it make sense that some residue of pathways are left between the visual cortex and the speech center? So even when you're stopped taking them, you're still going to process a little bit of that information in different parts of the area. And that seems to me why people that take large amounts of psychedelics would probably be able to see or begin to see the world differently, because they're still able to process regular information in different parts of the brain. What do you think
Yeah.
about that?
I think that's definitely, one thing that could be going on. I forget who said this, but the way they explain, I think it was Rick Strassman potentially, who explained it in a way that I liked. He compared the brain to a computer, and he gives an example that when your waking consciousness can maybe process something like 4,000 bytes per second, and when you put that brain on psychedelics, it can go up to like millions. And so
Wow.
he's posturing that there is a, it kind of ties back into our discussion of the physical world and what it is and what it appears to be. So if the world is vastly different than what we see it, but we need to see it a certain way consciously in order to survive in it, perhaps there is some mechanism in our brain that filters out the quote unnecessary information that we don't need to survive.
Mm.
And then when you take a psychedelic, it removes that filter, similarly what you said about the default node network, and you're now taking in way more information consciously. So the world appears very different. And anyone that's been on a psychedelic experience will know this. Like you start to see, I mean, time has a whole different relevance.
Yeah.
Time is like elastic, it contracts and expands in ways that you don't experience normally. You see, there's a kind of telepathy that happens between people that I've experienced multiple times, which I can't explain any other way than the fact that we're sharing thoughts. That's really the only way I can think of it. And then, of course, you have the synesthesia effect where you experience senses differently, colors change, and you almost see. I don't know. The first time I did LSD, I would compare it to if you'd never been to a 3D movie before, and you put on those glasses for the first time, and you just see these like extra layers to everything. That
Yeah.
to me was the experience, and that's a way I like to see it. You're just taking in more information that you normally don't.
Yeah. That's
Or
awesome.
that
What
maybe you're always taking it in, but you don't see it consciously. That's another way of thinking about it.
well, can you repeat that? I didn't catch that.
You're like maybe you are always taking in all information, but maybe your subconscious is always taking it in, but it's just filtered out in your conscious mind.
Yeah. Yeah. It leads me to another like idea. Like I'm so enamored with language, and I think that so many of the secrets that seem profound are hidden in our daily language. Like an example would be like, oh, if you take LSD or these psychedelics, it really opens your eyes, or that's really eye opening, or man, it made the scales fall from my eyes. And every time you're on it, it seems to me every time you're on psychedelics, like your pupils are like super dilated and like,
Yeah,
what better? It's just so weird that we would use that terminology when in fact that's exactly what it does. But what's behind the term, it opens your eyes? That means that you see more. It means that you get more information, that you understand more. At least it's a kind of a connotation like that. And it's just so weird that those drugs would come with that kind of explanation and also have that same sort of function, and it makes me start thinking like, what other phrases are like that? Like, well, how about a stream of consciousness?
mm-hmm.
Consciousness might be like a stream that flows through your daily life. It also flows through your brain the same way, and it has all these different offshoots, and that would explain why we don't focus on one thing so good. We're always daydreaming and we're thinking about this, and there's all these things going through our mind that we think are not connected, but they are in fact part of the same river system. You know what I mean? Isn't that
Yeah,
weird how language works like that?
yeah. And to expand on the consciousness thing, I guess there's one view of the world which is interesting. I think it's Hindu. Oh, sorry, something just fell.
Uh-oh, you all right?
Yeah, I'm good. It's just some other equipment here. Um, the term Brahman, which is I think Hindu, which is that's the universal consciousness. So in their model of things, everything is consciousness expressing itself. So you have Brahman, which is the godlike universal consciousness, and then Atman, which is us, like we're like little individual packets of consciousness experiencing the rest of consciousness. But we have the illusion that we're separate. And
Mm.
that's where a lot of the troubles come in life, where we think we are separate entities and we don't understand this connection to the overall Brahman greater consciousness. And I suppose that's one way to think about it, as like when you open your eyes to these psychedelics or you see this stream of consciousness, it's almost as if that barrier dissolves a little bit between the individual and the all. And yeah, I've had these. I don't know if we could talk about. I'd like to hear your experiences with psychedelics, but
Yeah.
I've had those. It's the same thing that the the spiritual writers of antiquity write about when they talk about samadhi, which is this idea of being part of the one consciousness, being part of everything, all is one, all these writings. The only time I've really felt that is on psychedelics. I mean, once or twice in meditation deeply, and then in breath work as well, but like most clearly in psychedelics, where I literally had these moments of no separation, like my body is gone. It's just consciousness. I'm just perceiving, and there's nothing else. That's all that there is. But I'm curious to hear about what you've tried and like what you've gotten.
Yeah, let's start trading some stories. I I'm a big fan of psychedelics, and I started off, probably 17. I used to take like a split an eighth with a friend and go watch a laser show, and that was even on such a small dose. I remember, I think maybe one time, yeah, I think it was an eighth, and I just remember having this unbelievable sense of clarity. I don't know what I was clear about, but I remember the clarity, and I just was like, oh, I get it, and I could hold this concept in my mind for a minute, and then I had taken a lot of time off, and then throughout my life in my 20s, and I would say from 18 to 20, I tried a lot of LSD, I tried a lot of mushrooms, and then later in my life, when I turned about 40, I started experimenting again. And as of recently, I've really moved towards, I saw Terence McKenna's Heroic Dose, and I decided it wasn't heroic enough for me. You know, I did take to heart his idea. One thing that McKenna said that really strikes me is that he would always say that, if you take mushrooms, the amount you should take, if you take mushrooms and you're not scared to death, you think you're going to die, then you haven't taken enough. Like, that's how you know what the dose is. And so I took that to heart, and I started off around 40. I started taking like 7 grams. And then recently, my most recent one, I did like 18 grams. And it was like, yeah, it was fucking mind blowing. And literally, it started off like, obviously, I want to say I'm a responsible person. I don't know if doing 18 grams is a responsible thing. So anyone listening to this, you should definitely be mindful if you're going to do it. Maintain your setting. Tell your loved ones you're doing it. Make sure the kids aren't around. And so I had all my bases covered. I told my wife, hey, I'm going big tonight. She's like, just leave me alone. Don't come in my room. Don't come in the room. You gonna be okay? I'm like, I'll be fine. And so what I have found on this particular dose was something. Let me tell you what the trip was, and then I'll tell you what I found different about large doses that is different than smaller doses. So this trip for me, I just laid in darkness, and I took the huge dose, and about 3 or 4 hours in, like, it started coming on really strong, and I began to like hear not so much like a voice outside of me, but a voice inside my head, and I felt like I was talking to an alien, and it was more I say alien, not like a ET, but alien in that it was something I had never felt before, like a true alien experience, like something you've never heard, never seen, or never can't even understand. I couldn't understand it because it was alien to me, but there was information I was getting about the world we live in, and it was a religious experience, because that's the best word I can use to describe it. It was this idea that we are in fact one with everything, that we came from a different planet. And this is going to sound crazy, and I don't know how true it is, but this is what I thought on the trip. I thought on the trip that, like, specifically white people, and I don't know how, this is probably going to sound so crazy, but like, this is what I thought on the trip.
Yeah, throw it out there. I love crazy shit.
Okay, so during this trip, I came to the realization, I heard in my head that we, like specifically white people, are aliens to this planet, and we are supposed to be here not to run over everything or be at war with everything, but we landed on this planet. And when we landed on this planet, we began fighting each other because we didn't come here. We crashed here on this planet, and there was 2 factions of us. And in my mind, like, it was in the Middle East somewhere where we crashed in this planet, and We ended up killing ourselves. And somewhere along the line, in order to stop the war that was happening on the planet, we decided to hide all evidence of us being from a different planet. That was the only way to bring the people of this planet together, was to hide the true history of our world. And so at that point in time, I go, holy shit, that makes so much sense. Jesus was an alien. Yeah, of course Jesus was an alien, you know? And then I'm like, okay, I should get my phone and start trying to call people, which is a horrible idea because I can't even like see
Yeah.
stuff on my phone, you know? And at that point in time, I'm laying down in my living room in my library, and I'm just looking up at all these books, like all these books tell the same story, and like just having these crazy thoughts of like, the that which resides in me wrote all these books, thus I wrote all these books. I know all the stories in these books because I've lived them before. These are my lives. And okay, and here's what's different about the big trips for me is that on a regular trip, say 3 to 7 grams, you come up through your cycles, it comes through waves, bigger waves, you go through the sets, and then it backs back down. And
Mhm.
I found like on a 7 gram dose, it was almost between 7 and 10 grams. It's almost impossible to bring back from the peak of the event what you experience. It's all fuzzy
Mhm.
and hazy. However, on a super high dose of psilocybin, I learned that there's a peak and then there's a second peak. And the clarity of that second peak is much more clear and tangible than the peak of a regular or even a 5 gram heroic dose trip. Because I've had some trips before where, like, oh, I think there was really cool stuff, but I don't remember it. But this trip, like, I can remember being there so clear. And I can remember laying on the ground and hearing the voice to this day tell me, we are the aliens. You are the aliens. Every species, you're here to protect every species on this planet because it's not ours. And it's important that you take care of everything, you know? And I was just kind of gives me goosebumps thinking about it. But so
Yep.
that was one of the bigger trips that I've done. And the rare thing on it was I found a double peak with extreme clarity. And it makes sense, if you go up higher, you should have a clearer view, right?
Yeah. Yeah. They say
So
when you ascend the higher dimensions, it's even clearer. Maybe
yeah,
that's
and
where you went. You went to 6D or some shit.
dude, it was wild, man. And it was wild. Thank you for letting me share that. People are gonna think I'm crazy, but that's what it was, and it
No,
was it was
no.
beautiful in so many ways.
I love this kind of stuff. I love it. It's a big
Nice.
mystery. I have a kind of alien experience as well. That's why I enjoy the
Please,
story.
yeah, please. Would you
Uh,
be? Would you be? Share that for us?
if we're talking about mushrooms, I've tried almost every psychedelic except
Okay.
for ibogaine.
Oh,
But if
okay.
we're talking about mushrooms, um, I had two very memorable and profound experiences. The first one, I don't even know how much I ate. Like it could have been a high dose, but it was a huge bag.
Right.
And it was like I was at a music festival for 4 days. It
Oh,
was
that's so
the
awesome.
last day. And it was the last day. It was hot and sunny the whole time. I've been partying for 3 days, not really drinking water or whatever. And this bag of mushrooms falls into my lap. I didn't even really want it, but someone was leaving and they're like, "We have these mushrooms." I was like, "Yeah, I gotta take them. You know, I gotta
Yep.
at least buy them." I tried to give them away. I was like, I really didn't want them. Like, guys, who wants it? Nobody wanted it. Everyone was tired. It'd been 4 days of partying. And then it was like, I don't know how much it was, but it was like a bag this big
Oh, that's
of
huge.
small mushrooms. So it's
That's
probably at
huge.
least 7 grams. At least
Oh, it's
seven
probably
grams. I
closer
don't
to
know.
an ounce that big, man.
Maybe. I don't know. But I just like, all right, well, we can't let these go to waste. So I just sat there and very slowly ate all of them. And then I had a horrible experience at
Mm,
first because as soon as it kicked in, I realized how horribly dehydrated I was.
yeah.
And I was like, literally, I like laid in, and the sun was still out. The sun was hot. So I was like crawling around the grass looking for shade, right? Just to get away from the sun. And I couldn't
Yep.
eat, like, I was too weak to get up. And I actually had a friend. I was like, can you get me some water? And he brought me some water. And I was like, and the water was making me like feel nauseous almost, like, because I realized later I had a like heat stroke or sunstroke,
Yeah.
and it was starting to kick in, and I was just feeling bad. And I was laying in the grass, and I laid down and looked at the sky, and I just started to watch the clouds and just feeling terrible. And I started having what you described, which happens to me a lot, is this kind of dialogue. And
Yeah. That's a
I
great way to
don't
put it.
think, yeah, but it's a thought form dialogue.
Yep.
So it's not in words, but I would think a thought, and that thought would be answered either instantaneously. That thought would be answered either with another thought or some kind of event or something happening in the world. So I was sitting there like kind of playing with this thought communication, feeling horrible, right? Feeling horrible
Yeah.
and thinking, oh my God, I'm gonna like, am I gonna die? And I was like, I thought I was gonna die because I
Yeah,
imagined worst
totally.
case scenario, like fuck, I'm gonna die here. I can't get myself up. Like I can't get home. It was like an hour and a half from home. So I started conversing with this thing, and I don't know. We had this little conversation, and I said to it, "Am I going to die today?" And then it said no, and I said okay, and I felt better. And then I asked it out of curiosity. I was like, "What happens when you die?" And instantly, I was filled with like this endless joy and like this the white light thing, like just filled with this infinite joyous white light warmth thing where I was completely at peace, like just no worry at all. And like joy, and like I'm shaking too, like just trying to remember this experience. I
Yeah.
was like, holy shit, right? And it was just like, whoa. And then after that, it only lasted a couple of seconds, but it's what the people talk about with the near death experience, where they go
Yeah.
through the tunnel, they see the light, they feel the joy. And I thought, oh, well, then there's really nothing to worry about, is there? And I just felt like fine. And everything went away. And I was like, oh, okay, then I'm good. Well, even if I die, like it's right. Death is
Yeah.
awesome. So I was sitting there and eventually got better and was like drinking water. And I'm like, man, it's been hours. And I look at my phone and it was like 20 minutes. I was like, oh shit, I still have 3 hours of this trip left to enjoy.
Mhm.
Right. So then I drank water, felt better, and then it's just like I went in the woods or whatever, and I was like playing with the squirrels and birds and stuff, and just enjoying my time. And then I managed to get home, and I needed like 4 liters of IV hydration. My mom's a nurse. She took one look at me. She's like, "Man, you're fucked up." And then she laid me up on the couch and gave me an IV drip to sort of get my energy back. And I was like, that just stuck with me. That was almost 10 years ago, and I still remember that. And so that was
Man.
one of my major experience with what you described, this like something. Maybe it's a hallucination. Maybe it's what happens to schizophrenics. I don't know. But it felt like I was speaking with something. And then I had another experience where I don't think it was as high a dose, but it was something like a heroic dose where I did what you did. I laid down in the dark at
Yeah.
nighttime. And I was sort of staring at the ceiling, and then through like whatever I was looking at the ceiling, a shape coalesced out of something in the ceiling, and it was like a face of sorts. And I remember thinking, okay, maybe this is an entity of some sort, because it looked like it was looking at me. And I started playing with it. I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna try to talk to this thing.
Mhm.
And I asked it. This is all mental, of course. It's all
Yeah.
thought forms. And I said, what are you? And then it showed me a series of images that meant architect. There was a
Wow.
symbol for architect. I was like, okay, interesting. And then I said, how do I? So, by the little context, I'm laying in my bed. It's pitch dark. I know that somewhere over to the left of my bed, there is a cup of water. I don't know where it is. It's just like, and so I said, how do I know you are real? And then the next thing that happened was my lips got very dry and I needed to take a water. And then I went and reached blindly for the cup, and my hand hit the cup exactly where it needed to be. It was like it found it instantaneously.
Yeah.
Like, and then I'm like, okay, like what do I do with that, right? Like, is that proof or is it? Because 9 times out of 10, when I'm looking for the cup to the side of my bed, I've got to look around, I've got to
You're
search
right.
for it, maybe knock it over or whatever. This one time, it's like, okay, it's exactly there, right?
Yep.
So it's just one of those mysteries that you don't know what the hell it is, and it's just kind of amusing. But yeah, I wonder about that. I wonder if there are these other dimensions out there that are invisible, and then we sort of interact with energy. Like, why wouldn't there be energy that's invisible? That's maybe a being of pure consciousness that doesn't have a physical form. Like, it's possible. So I leave it open to possibility.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think it's naive like we in the beginning of the podcast, we were already talking about the limitations of our knowledge. I think it'd be pretty hubristic to think that we know what happens. Like we don't know anything. I think we're barely out of the trees in some ways. Like, and how many times do you hear people talk about a guardian angel or someone that saves them, or like there's clearly something we're interacting with that changes the course of our life. Call it God or Buddha or Allah or whatever spiritual being you believe it to be. Like there's something there. And when you ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist and make a conscious decision to ignore the signs in front of you, that ends up being pretty bad, or a lot, at least for some people, I think.
Yeah,
There has to be some energy there. I think you could prove it. I don't know how to prove it, but I think it can be done.
me neither, because everything's so subjective. I'm not sure how to prove it. But I think you said guardians, and I think it was Carl Jung or was somebody who was
Mm.
really prolific creative that ascribed all of their creativity to some kind of guardian being that they encountered through maybe with psychedelics or whatever. And this they gave it a name too. They said this being called whatever appeared in my life, and that was a source of all my inspiration for all the work I've done in my life. So that's something to
Yeah.
consider, I guess. So like
Yeah.
voices in your head, maybe don't drown them out right away.
Yeah, I think Tesla too said that he was told all his inventions. He spoke to an entity, and I think it's pretty prolific through different mystics throughout the time about how ideas were given to him and passed on to them. Some of them nefarious in some ways, but yeah, you look
That's
at
a
the
good
power
point.
of prayer.
Why couldn't there be evil ones out there, trickster ones? Right? If there are, they're not all angels. And it's, I guess, be careful if you're a psychonaut and you go out on these journeys.
You know what? Like, speaking of nefarious energies and psychedelics, like I've found too. I had a trip a while back that was maybe like 5 grams. And I found myself in a place about 3 hours in where, you know, I felt like I was communing with spirits. I felt like I could try on different ideas. And what I mean by that is that I felt like ideas were given to me that I could use on my podcast. And some of them I would try on and be like, that is way too sinister. I would never do that. I would never say this about this group of people. But I could see how powerful that would be. Like that would be pretty powerful. You would probably get a lot of stuff if you did that. But that's a horrible thing to do. But in that moment, like I felt like I was in a store and I had different people there that were like, hey, try this one on. Okay. Oh, that sounds interesting, but I'm not a horrible person. Thanks. You can have that one back. Or, hey, how about this one? Hey, I've never thought about it like that. But I was able to try on ideas and see through them the potential outcomes like I would see through a mask. And it was pretty liberating, and in some ways like very fulfilling to be there. I'm like, I can't believe I'm here getting to learn these things. And it made me realize that maybe the greatest information isn't something we learn, it's something that's revealed to us. You start
Hmm.
thinking about all these people that have come up with ideas. It's like, oh, I was laying under the Buddha tree, or I was just out here doing some things, and then I had this idea. But it seemed once I was in that state, it like clicked. I'm like, oh, I see. These ideas are revealed to you. It's not that you've learned them and you've studied and stuff, or maybe like both of us probably do a lot of reading. However, I think the ideas can be revealed to you. And then you're like, oh, this is not my idea. This is everybody's idea. I just tapped into it.
I got an idea. I want to pitch it to you. Let me know what you think
Yeah,
about this. It's something
please.
I was curious about for a while, but never really gave much energy to. But let me like lay a bit of a foundation first.
Fantastic.
So we talked about psychedelics. We talked about what happens to the mind, and we talked about some sort of telepathy that may happen. And it's hard to know if it's happening when you're doing it by yourself, but I've had some experiences with others where I feel like there is a kind of telepathy or shared consciousness going on. So there's one story where I think this was a few years ago. I had an older friend. He was probably 50 at the time, and he had never done any psychedelic before. And he knew I had experience, so he reached out. He's like, "I want to try mushrooms," and I said, "Cool. Like, why don't you come over on Saturday, and then we'll do mushrooms." So I didn't do as much as him because I wanted to stay somewhat like alert because I
Right.
wanted to make sure he didn't have any major issues that I had to be alert for. So what we did was we just took the mushrooms, we laid on the couch. We had this like day bed thing that we just laid out on, closed our eyes, did not say a word for 3 hours. We just lay down and closed our eyes. I got up, my trip was over. I sat up, opened my eyes. About 2 minutes later, he sat up and opened his eyes, and we recounted our trips, and it was like so much overlap. Like we had like this, we saw the same things, we experienced the same insights. It was like a shared experience. It's kind of weird. And then I gave him some to take home with him. I was like, hey, if you want to, like, I had some extra, so take this home, like experiment with yourself if you want. He goes home. A few weeks later, I see him again, and he said he got his wife to try them because his wife was curious, and she was a devout Muslim at the time, I believe, like pretty strict. And she took them by herself in her bedroom, and my friend was watching TV or whatever, and they had 2 kids, and the daughter was in his third room coloring. And so his wife had her experience. When she was done, she got up to go see what her daughter was doing. Her daughter was drawing the tree of life on a piece of paper, and she had seen that exact image during her trip. So this is the groundwork for, and I had other like minor things where I feel like I'm sharing someone's mind, or we're thinking the same vibration level or whatever. We're on the same wavelength. So this is the groundwork for what I'm trying to propose to you. So we
Yeah.
have this concept of shared telepathy via psychedelics. The other concept of the mind as a transmitter of brainwaves and intentions and thoughts, and the idea of a mastermind where when you get a bunch of people in a room together and you all focus on the same thing or image or goal, the amplification effect of that. Now, what if you had that combined with a psychedelic experience? What if you had something like a ritual, like I mentioned before in the last podcast, I'm in the Freemasons where we have these rituals and we have a meeting or a ceremony or something, all under the influence of such a thing and all directed to one singular purpose, like what you could potentially create in the world with that kind of sustained, intense energy. I'm just throwing that idea out there. Like, I'd be fascinated to, I don't know, try it, or I don't know, organize people to do this. I don't know how, but it would be interesting.
Okay. I'll blow your mind right now. I was going to ask you, what do you think a new Eleusinian Mysteries would look like?
We're
Like,
just thinking about that with you, Miss. I was saying that.
I've been
Like,
thinking about it a lot. Like, talk
yeah,
about that for shared telepathy. Like, I was up here
yeah.
in the wineries thinking, like, okay, can I find a winery that has a theater that you could invite people to, and you would have like a
Oh,
sort of a Cirque du Soleil where people came in the crowd, and like, you know, you would want to recreate. I know from reading a little bit about the Eleusinian Mysteries that part of the play they did was when Demeter lost her daughter Persephone. So imagine a crowd of like-minded people on sort of a 3-gram psychedelic trip, and they take it and they're all sitting together in this theater and there's lights, and you watch this woman lose a child, be it through some sort of tragedy. Imagine what a felt tragedy under the influence of psychedelics would be like. It would be like all of us together losing that child, because you would feel
mhm.
that experience. You would feel the connection with the people next to you. And then all of a sudden, the reconnection, the daughter reappears. And so now you have this shared loss, you have a shared sense of tragedy, which brings everybody together. And then you have a shared sense of gratitude that releases the negative energy. And it's like, dude, we did it. And it's the same way that the brain builds better relationships by going back and forth through the synaptic gap. that kind of connection between people, when you have shared goals and shared sacrifices, potentially under the influence of a psychedelic, I think it's that sort of healing process that would help people. And if you want to break it down to like a fractal level, so above, so below. If that's the way the brain works to make better connections, why wouldn't it work the same way between people? If two people can feel the exact same loss, see, I can explain the loss to you about my son, but you can't experience it. However, you can, if you see someone lose their child and I see someone lose their child, we may not explain it the same way, but we feel it intense together.
Yeah.
And that's the same way. That's better than any language. That is a true communication of feeling between one another.
Mhm.
So I think that that's something that would happen if you found yourself in a ritualistic setting and use psychedelics in that way. I think that the possibilities are endless. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
you could argue Charles Manson did that though too.
Yeah. I was going to say, I mean, what's different from this than a cult, you know?
I
Yeah.
think the intention, maybe, I mean,
Yeah.
maybe the word cult gets a bad name. I mean, so much of
Maybe.
the cult, and maybe that's on purpose. Maybe the word cult gets a bad name because we don't want people divvying too far from the productive nature of multinational corporations.
It could be that. I like the analogy you have with the synapses. I was just visualizing how individual people would be those synapses, or like we were talking about Brahman being the universal
Yes.
consciousness. And we have these points of consciousness of people, but then these
Yeah.
points merge, and you have suddenly instead of this, you have like say this of the greater whole, and
Yeah.
then what you could carve out of the greater whole with an expanded group of co-acting consciousness. That's interesting to me.
Yeah. Well, I look at it like this. Like, so think of George Monty or Kevin Holt as a thought in the mind of God. And all of a sudden, the more you focus, like, you have begun developing yourself as a thought into an idea, into an action. Like, you are Kevin Holt, who decided to travel and then write a book, and now you're doing these podcasts, you're traveling the world. So it's like you're gaining this momentum, you're growing as a thought to an idea and becoming an action. So if we are thoughts in the mind of God, then perhaps the main goal for each one of us should be to become an action of God.
Hmm.
Do
Yeah,
you
I
ever get
like it.
that feeling? Right?
Well, yeah, that's what they say. The way to experience the divine is to have it act through you and to have the
Wow.
divine actor within you, right? Because there's creation. It's the same analogy again. Like if everything is God, everything is Brahman, and we're the Atman, we're the small piece of Brahman, then our task is to be the whole through the one. And then our action would then has what's the word, like we would export that into the world with our creation.
Yeah.
So by creating, we are the creator, as above so
Yeah.
below. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you get that? Like when you wrote your book, do you get the feeling like people read it and it helps them? Like, how does that feel for you?
I mean, it feels good, if they enjoy it, then awesome.
Yeah.
um, Nobody reads it, okay, but I hope people read it and get a sense of what I'm trying to say. And I would love to be able, I wish you could, it goes back to what you're saying about shared feelings. Sometimes I wish I could just, I think we stopped for a minute there.
Oh, might have glitched a little bit, but
Are
I
you
can hear
there?
you fine. Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, I can tell.
Okay.
Sometimes I wish I could just touch someone and transfer that, like what I'm feeling. Like I want you to have that,
Yeah.
and it's impossible right now. And so the book is the closest thing I can think of to that, to try to give that feeling.
Yeah. That's a great way to explain the act of creation and maybe even intention in there. Like when you, in some ways, what I like about your book and why I can see the transference is that the book you wrote has plenty of sections for people to do their own homework, for them to come up with. You provide a framework for people to experiment with their own consciousness, kind of give them a roadmap to do that, and I think there is something brilliant and beautiful about being able to show people the way. And if you think about that terminology, like it's pretty beautiful to show someone the way, whether they're a lost traveler or they're a lost soul. You know, if you can point them in the right direction, I think that you're doing the right thing.
Sorry, we cut out again.
Well, that's all right. I was just saying that I think that
Yeah.
being able to show someone the directions in life or being able to share with someone experiences is just another reason of why we're here. Being the, you know, having
Right.
God.
And I don't have, and I don't have the way, right? I'm
No
not
one does.
claiming to
No
have
one.
the way
Right.
at all, right?
Right.
I don't think anyone does exactly. So
Maybe a
it's
road sign.
just all you can do is, yeah, road sign. It's just like here's a what do you call the cairn, this pile of stones of a traveler that's been here before, and then you
Yeah.
can maybe read the stones and maybe you take something and you discard something else.
Or
That's
use them
all
in
it
a
is.
whole nother way. You know what I mean? Maybe it's a gift used in a whole nother way
Yeah.
that you never even thought about. Yeah.
One
What I
sec.
was
I'm gonna
thinking.
switch to the other Wi-Fi just to make sure it's not me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice.
The other
Better?
Wi-Fi definitely works.
Oh,
Yeah,
nice. Okay, nice. Nice.
we're
Yeah,
back.
so
But yes, signposts. Yeah, I think that's really all we can hope to do for those of us that decided to go into the dark forest, which is a choice. You can
right,
stay on the path if you want, and
right.
that is a little bit of what I talk about in the book, where I was on that sort of easy, well grooved path. And part of me wishes that I was just fine with that because, that's is easy.
Yeah.
It's set out for you. You just have to kind of walk through the motions. And I could have just made more and more money, it's security and so on. But some of us choose to go off course and go into the dark forest. And then we have people like yourself or whoever we meet on the road. And all they do is they say, George was here and this is what George
Yeah.
did. And then you can see, oh,
Yeah.
well, how much does it apply to me? Hopefully you find a new path in the forest.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think well, I think you told me a quote one time, or I know I've read it somewhere, and probably a lot of people have heard it, that says, when you're ready to learn, someone shows up to help you. And I look back at that in my life, and throughout my life, I've had a couple mentors that one guy was my neighbor. I didn't even know him. This guy, Rick from New Jersey. I moved in, and there was this old guy, and I can't tell you how much this guy changed my life just by throwing some darts and talking some stories about life and how to live life. And it's amazing how along the way people just show up in your life to kind of help you.
Yeah, could be a stranger. I mean, there was a woman in Japan I didn't know for very long, had a huge impact on me. I only knew her for a few weeks, but yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about. I got I was thinking today too about altered states of consciousness. Since we were talking about like the mushroom experience, LSD, and these different things, how much do you think like today's world of education stops us from experiencing alternate states of consciousness? Or do you think that the world we live in today kind of frowns upon alternate states of consciousness?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you touched on this before, where we're talking about cults and maybe that all those things in some cases are a psyop because they want to keep you in the producer state of consciousness where you go through the motions, you don't question anything, and you don't really step out of that. Because, I mean, the thing that I got from pretty much every single psychedelic experience is that we don't need, like, I don't need someone to tell me what to do,
I
right?
hate that.
Nobody knows anything. So,
Yeah.
like, who are you to tell me what to do? You don't know anything.
Right.
I don't know anything. So the only authority is really inner authority. And people, unfortunately, because of fear or conditioning or whatever. We're programmed. We're like, let's think about it this way: everyone's alone in the wilderness. Ultimately, like we're all in this rock in chaos in the dark forest, afraid, don't know what the hell is going on, don't know what happens after we die, don't know what life means. So people are looking for someone to just swoop in and go, I know what's going on. I know what's up. Just follow me and everything's going to be fine. All right. That guy's full of shit or that girl's full of shit. But because we need that or people need that, I was just writing about this yesterday about how I was saying something and I intentionally use the words I think or it seems to me or in my opinion because I acknowledge that of the one thing I know for sure is that I don't know much for sure. So I always leave that open to, okay, I might be full of shit. I might be completely wrong about
Right.
everything, but this is what it appears to me. However, my friend was telling me that I was trying to like I don't know what I was trying to do, but I was trying to speak on with knowledge on something. And she's like, you shouldn't use those words because it makes you seem like you're not an authority. And I'm like, but I'm not an authority.
Yeah.
Like there is no authority. It's an illusion that the fact that there even could be an authority. But that reality doesn't resonate with what most people need to hear from someone because they need to be reassured. They need to be told that they're going the right way or that they're following the right person. So I forget what did we start talking about? I went on this tangent. I don't remember where we initially started.
We were just talking about the way in which society conditions us to.
Oh, yeah. So we're conditioned. People have that as a basis, right? They have the basis of I'm afraid, I don't know what's going on. So then that's an opportunity for people or negative energies to swoop in and sort of capture your consciousness and capture your energy and direct it toward a certain direction that benefits those people that captured it. So anything that's taking you out of that is going to be frowned upon. So a psychedelic is number one. I mean, everyone's done LSD and remembers the flower child days. All we need is community and love and self-determination. We don't need structures. We don't need people to, tell us what to do. So yeah, that's probably one of the reasons why they vigorously attacked the psychedelic world in the 70s with the anti-war movement that happened in the US. And because before that, it was very deeply researched, heavily researched in psychological settings. And then it just turned off overnight because the people were getting uppity, right? So then they took all these substances and they made them Schedule I prohibited substances. And only now do we have this renaissance of people starting to look into it again, at least therapeutically. So yeah, I think there's huge interest in them, they or whoever is ruling over us to keep us down by not making us realize that we have all the authority. They actually don't have anything. And we're just relinquishing it constantly to other people. And education systems also kind of do that. So the main task, I guess, for if you want to be a spiritual adult, we can talk about different lines of maturity, right? We've got the age maturity, we've got emotional maturity, we've also got spiritual maturity. So most people, unfortunately, remain in a spiritually childlike state. If you can imagine this spiritually frightened child lost in the forest, waiting for someone to show up and hold their hand and take them somewhere. But if we want to be a spiritual adult, then one of the first things we have to do is uneducate ourselves of our education, like unlearn so much. So it's almost like required that we do school for society, but once you hit a certain age, it's like, okay, now it's time to unlearn 90% of it. And that's going to take some time. I mean, it took probably most of my 20s to really try to peel all that stuff back and just see what served me and what I could drop. And psychedelics were a huge part of that. So if you want to keep people in line, then ban them and label what we're talking about as nonsense and crazy talk and just the talk of a bunch of druggies, man. It's nothing. You guys aren't upstanding people of society. You're just a bunch of, you're doing the dope, whatever. It's so easy to dismiss it. And so it's up to us to really own it, I think.
Yeah, that's really well put. Like I've been reading this I've been reading this book. It's called Altered States of Consciousness, and it's this series of lectures from like 1977, and it's so amazing to me. And it's beautiful, but it's also a little frightening. It's beautiful because they were beginning to answer the questions that we're beginning now, but it's also scary because it's the exact same questions, which means they were never answered. And some of the
Yeah.
questions are like, you know, it's some of the questions are the language we have used from Freud on to define science, to use like this. Let me just, can I just read you a little passage here of it?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Okay. In this section, it says, lacking the artist's freedom from the constraints of scientific method, behavioral scientists have focused much more on the products of specific directed thinking or on the study of isolated features of thought, such as the vividness of images, the effectiveness of imagery, impaired associate learning, and other forms of problem solution. By their very nature, the methods of the experimental psychologist have led perhaps to an overweighting of the structured, directed, rational aspects of thought. Studies of concept learning or of abstraction abilities of various forms of categorical thinking and of arithmetic or spatial problem solution have predominated because they are easy to conduct and control. And let me just read this other section right here. Indeed, it might be argued that Freud overplayed the logical and rational quality of mature waking thought and underestimated the adaptive and directed quality of wishful, imagery laden thinking. Like, if you just think
Mm.
about that for a minute, the very foundations on which a lot of our scientific method was built was constrained from parts of thinking that are not controllable. And I can understand wanting to get away from the abstract, but in getting rid of the abstract, you get away from potential solutions of problems. And it does make
Mm.
it controlled. And all of a sudden, as soon as it comes down to the scientific method, in the soft sciences, maybe now you have an authoritarian setup in a way, like, no, this is it, you did that
Yep.
wrong. And look where we
Mm.
are right now with science. Like, I read an article yesterday that talked about there's been a whole lot of potential problems showing that all the work in Alzheimer's has been falsified with the
Oh, I saw
amount
that.
of. Isn't that mind blowing? Can you imagine? Like, I
Yep.
can't imagine that. That's the problem.
I saw a similar thing about the antidepressants that also came out in the last 2 weeks. That the science that were based on antidepressant use, brain chemistry was also totally flawed.
It's like the entire tobacco. We've used the entire tobacco industry scientists for everything, or
Yeah,
the.
and it's you talk about the abstract, and it sort of ties into it all ties into like what you were saying about logical, rational thinking being emphasized, and the way we think
Yep.
of science today, and related to our last talk, where we were saying about how unless you have a PhD in something, they basically
Yep.
tell you to shut up, you don't know anything.
Yep. Yep.
So the end result is that basically society is saying that intuition is nonsense.
Yep.
They're just discarding it. Like, there is no intuition anymore. It's like, what can we measure? What can we prove?
Right.
What can we put in a paper? And then common sense is gone too. Like, you to throw out intuition, you throw out common sense as well. So we're going down this one, I guess, the left brain path only, and we're totally ignoring the other one.
Yeah. There's a great book by oh gosh, Ian McGilchrist. He's got two books actually. One is called The Master and His Emissary. And that particular book talks about the left hemisphere being the analytical part of your brain, being the emissary, and the right hemisphere being the master. And he says that the right hemisphere sees the big picture and uses the analytical scalpel of the left hemisphere to communicate using words and logic to you know, the emissary is supposed to say what the master wants it to. But over the last few years, the overuse of emissary, the hyper exposure of analytical literature and the hyper exposure to the sharp scalpel that is the analytical mind has caused the emissary to kind of take over the king and be like, yeah, I'm just going to push you to the side, like something out of like a Shakespearean novel, you know. It's
Yep.
getting rid of the right side. And if you look at a lot
Yeah,
of
that's
people
exactly.
who, yeah, right,
No, go ahead, I interrupt you. Go ahead.
oh, so, just to think about, if we look at that, if we look at the world of the analytical, if we look at the world of the scientific paper writing the future, if we look at the world of almost the technocratic takeover that's happening, the way we can look at the world through ones and zeros, and it makes sense because there's enough sort of resources for everybody. If we just split it up a certain way, then we'd be perfect. If you look at that analytical reasoning, you start to see things like the mass inoculation of children in the name of science because it makes sense. Like it's just that this scientific takeover has gone way too. It's this analytical takeover that is not seeing the humanitarian side of it, even though it promises to talk about it. I don't know if I did a good job explaining that.
You did, but what they say, sorry, what we're talking about, the analytical takeover,
Yeah,
they act as though they're flawless, that they are almost um, clinically precise, as if it were an AI or something that was incapable of error. But they don't mention that everything is still motivated by very human incentives, and the incentive to maybe falsify something for personal or financial gain. And I have these discussions about the current vaccine campaign, and people are like, well, when is it going to end? Like, when are they going to stop going with fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth boosters?
never.
And I don't think it's going to end, because not because of anything. Maybe there is something nefarious, I don't know. But if you just look at pharma as a company, they made record profits last year. And every company has it as its fiduciary responsibility to grow. So next quarter has got to be more than this quarter,
Yeah,
and forever. So even taking any conspiracy out of it, their job is to make more money. So they're going to find more ways to make more money. And that means pushing more boosters. That means pushing more drugs. That means taking monkeypox, which is fucking a nothing burger, and turning it into a global pandemic of international concern so they can put out more medicine and vaccines for that. And now it's got a life of its own. It's its own monster. And yeah, we just act like this is science. There's no motivation here other than the desire to do good, which is clearly isn't the case. There are too many human factors.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you don't need to have any sort of wild thinking to understand a business model. It's right there.
Yeah.
It's what everybody does.
It could be just simply incompetence. It could be just business and then momentum, and that's it. Like, a lot of it's just
Yeah,
momentum. They've set up all these testing centers and technology to test and track people, and people are employed by that. And then if you're a company, you're trying to keep your employees, you're trying to grow, so they're going to just push to keep it going.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes I was thinking recently about our modern medical system, and once I read the article about the data on Alzheimer's being potentially wrong, it made me wonder, like, well, if that's wrong, what else is wrong? And then it
Oh
made me
yeah.
think, you know what I mean? Like, and then obviously it brings you back to the idea, like, why are doctors just always practicing? Because they don't know what they're doing. So they're always just practicing. They're never really doing anything, But but it makes me think,
Sorry, I'm gonna
yeah,
jump in
it
on
make,
that science bit a bit if I can.
yeah, please.
This is another thing that I kind of am passionate about, uneducating people about. People, like you said, people have this idea that science is always right and it's infallible, and there's this peer review process to make sure that humans don't make mistakes. I am not an academic per se, but I was in the academic world for a time. During my master's program, I used to help Taiwanese people edit and translate their academic papers for publication in English speaking journals. And I used to work with the dean of the school on that. And so he would help me also correspond with journals. So we would do the draft, we would send it in, he would get, they would make comments or whatever, send it back, we would edit it and send it back again to try to get it published. So there's a few things to kind of highlight what we're talking about here, the motivations and so forth. Teachers, professors are motivated in many universities by publications. So the number of publications they make and in which journals they make them is directly contributing to tenure, to promotion, and so forth. So they have a financial personal incentive to get published. Okay, that's point number one. Point number two, the peer review process that we claim is like this infallible check, usually it's only 3 people looking at it. So he would send it in. There's a paper editor, the journal editor would either say thumbs up or down right away. And if he said thumbs down, so he said thumbs up, he would send it to like 3 other professors in that field to read, just 3. And at no point in the process does anyone check the raw data. Never.
Whoa.
They only check if your methodology makes sense, if the structure of your reasoning makes sense, if your conclusions make sense from the data you've presented. No one has the ability to check if you didn't just make up numbers. The only way to check that is to reproduce the study. But there is no incentive to reproduce a study, because if you're a scholar trying to make your name for yourself, why would you spend all your time trying to duplicate Mr. So-and-so's work instead of working on your own work? So
That's
it's
mind blowing.
very easy for entire disciplines to be created based on one very flawed study that seems good, and then other people, instead of trying to prove that study, they base their studies off the already approved study. So they take their conclusions that already exist and assume that they use that as like their foundation for their reasoning. And you can build entire fields like that. So
That
yeah, like a lot of it is just nonsense. Like we don't even know. Like, and I think there was somebody that tried to do that. I forget which field it was in, but some scholars tried to reproduce the studies of a particular field, and they only got like 14% of them, and the rest didn't. The rest failed. Like, again,
man.
it goes into like what is a reality? We don't even know, because a lot of the science that we think is infallible may not be. It may be a house of cards.
Yeah, it sounds like look. I mean, just look around the world right now. Like, look at what's happening. Like, it makes more sense if the majority of the things we thought we knew were wrong. Just look around the
Yeah.
world right now. And
I mean, if there are
yeah,
human incentives, you can almost guarantee it's wrong, right? If there's
yeah,
a human incentive, you know the ego is getting involved, you know that things will probably get skewed and there will be bias. Almost guaranteed.
yeah. I saw an interesting interview um, a couple years ago, and it was a bunch of scientists at the Milken Institute, and they were some, I forgot which schools they were from, but they were from some pretty big schools, and they were talking about the future of medicine. And they had talked about how with so many baby boomers retiring, 10,000 baby boomers retiring a day, and the problems we have with healthcare, and the problems we have with medicine, and the problems we have with insurance companies and liabilities, the best way to go about medicine in the future is to just come up with these drugs and try them out, because there's so much red tape, there's so many problems, there's so much money involved, that by the time they get to a potential drug that could help, it's already 20 years later and they have all these new things. So why not just, if you have something in the pipeline, just start testing it on people? And on some level, I could see the guy that said it was very passionate about helping people. I could see that in his mind, he had probably lost patience to red tape. He had probably lost patience to drugs that ended up helping people. And I'm sure
Yep.
that the liability from that is crazy. But those are big questions. Can you just take a drug and test it on people? Can you take them and then, maybe someone gives my dad a drug, but I didn't want that, so there's liability involved there. But might that be? And then, and granted, this was a few years ago. And then when I see the way in which things are being rolled out now, I have to wonder to myself, is this the way in which good people are trying to do new medicine? And they're big questions, and it's too bad we can't have these type of, instead of a Super Bowl, wouldn't it be amazing if we had like 4 doctors on both sides going head to head to debate about the way medicine should be? Or, instead of bread and circus, perhaps we should have incredible debates like Buckley Chomsky did, 25 years ago about foreign policy. Like I don't see any reason why we can't be having these huge debates and huge public forums to make our world better. But instead, everything is kept hush hush and quiet, and we move forward with blinders on. It makes me sad.
Yeah, and I think the only way we're ever going to get this to change is we just have to change the incentives. So the example you mentioned about the guy who wanted to fast track drugs, he might have been doing it from a good place, but it
Right.
runs into the same problem as academic research in that
Right.
there is more incentive to produce new exciting results financially and personally than there are to prove after the fact whether it works. So unless you had some perhaps publicly funded body of money, that they devote billions of dollars to verifying research or to following up on new drugs for real, if there's actually a side effect or whatever 10 years later, because there's no incentive to do that now. There's no money in
Right.
that. So we're never going to know for sure what's going on with these vaccines because there's too little hard data and people aren't investigating it enough. But those
Right.
incentives right now are flipped, right? I don't know how we're going to do that, but if you could somehow figure that out, right, what make the incentive to track the the veracity of everything that were invented, then maybe it will change. I don't think anyone's figured out or maybe put much energy into figuring it out.
Yeah, I agree. It seems to me that I guess this is the kind of the plan for everything is if you don't stop, then you lose everything, and it seems that we're on the cusp of, like, there's so much good science out there, and there's so many people behind science that have given their life to help people, but the way it's been bastardized lately, and the studies, because of the incentive process like you explained, or the peer review, having whole industries built on houses of cards, it tarnishes the name, and it makes it almost not worthwhile for people to even look at.
Yeah. I wish we had that. I wish there was like some incentive for people to go and verify other research. At least make us more confident.
Well, I mean, so there are people that, like, I've learned that there's people that, like, if I put out a video, there's a whole slew of people on YouTube that, hey, you spelled that wrong, you big dummy. So there's people that will go and look for stuff just because they want to, or
Yeah.
they see it and they're
Yeah.
like, hey, you dummy, look at that. So I think that the some sort of built-in incentive process is there. Maybe it is doing a what if we started like some sort of like GoFundMe for finding, how about like how tech companies pay a bug bounty? Maybe we could
Mhm.
start like a GoFundMe bug bounty for problems in peer review research, like I bet you I would pitch in for that, right?
I would too, but if you're a researcher, like, would you rather be a writer or would you rather be a reviewer of other writers? So we have to like somehow convince people to take their ego out of it and then go that route.
Maybe like high school kids for extra money, like maybe
Yeah.
or
Yeah, we have to
like,
tie it to money somehow. That's gonna motivate people. No,
wouldn't it
it's
be
sad,
funny?
but it's
Wouldn't it be funny if we could get a group of like fifth graders to do it and like find holes and like these people with masters, like their theories, like, hey, you guys, there's a
that would be
fifth
great.
grade team.
Yeah.
Oh, you guys got
Uh,
debunked by the Santa Rosa third graders. Good job, guys.
yeah. Couldn't pass fifth grade scrutiny.
Uh,
Embarrassing. Yeah, maybe there's
yeah,
not enough shame. We gotta figure it
I,
out
I
somehow.
yeah, there was a book written recently about how powerful public shaming is, and
Hmm.
I'm not saying you got to bring back yellow stars or a scarlet letter, but something to be said about public shaming. I mean, we've gone from public shaming to having no shame. It's, in fact,
Yeah.
yeah, I scam these people. So what? It's almost like when you think of shame, on one level you have the Nigerian print scam, and on the other side you have like the Federal Reserve. They're kind of the same thing. You know what I mean? They're
Yeah.
just stealing everybody's money.
Yeah, it's built into the cake now. And my girlfriend was telling me something crazy too. There's this, I didn't watch it, but there's this show on Netflix called The Tinder Predator or The Tinder Scammer. And he was some guy who would get on the And I don't know how he did it exactly, but he extorted all kinds of money from women and got them to pay for his lifestyle. And he got away with it because it was all in their name. Like he didn't actually sign on anything, and they voluntarily would sign for loans for him and stuff like that. So that happened, and now he's got a TV show. They're like, we need to promote this guy, and it's just holy shit. I mean, all of Asian culture works on shame,
Right.
and there are obviously negatives to that because with shame you have obedience. I don't know if that has that. Like, Switzerland does a pretty good job balancing those because Switzerland's pretty conformist, but they've also got an independent streak. So I think you got to find that balance of cultural shaming so that people kind of like aren't assholes, but
Yeah.
still have control over their country.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think we had this. And Asia goes a little too far the other way. Like everyone's like very obedient culturally, and they don't want to stand out. But then, of course, they just they don't stand up. They don't rise up.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was at my kid goes to in Hawaii, you know, there's a lot more Asian influence than there is Western influence. And I was at a meeting in the morning with my kid and some other, well, not my kid, but at my kid's school with these other parents. And one of the counselors was talking about, what is it that you parents want to see from us as teachers? Like, what is the end result? What kind of things would you like us to instill in your kids? And the Japanese lady next to me said, I want my child to be an obedient child. And I'm like, that's the last thing I want. I want my kid to be challenging authority. So when she said that, I had to stop for a minute and like think about like, I want my child to be an obedient child. And like on one level, I'm like, no, I don't want that. But on the other level, I'm like, maybe she has a different definition of what obedience is. And so it made me stop for a minute and think about how difficult it is for the teachers at my kids' school to like try to balance this idea of all these different cultures being together. And I would agree. I ended up raising my hand and saying, I can I ask you what you mean by obedience? And she's like, well, I want him to be respectful to me and respectful to his parents. And I'm like, well, I can get behind that idea of obedience. And then I told her, well, I understand that and I like that as well. However, do you think it might be worthwhile to have your child challenge the barriers that are in front of him? And we were able to come to some sort of agreement. It was clear that we didn't see things the same way, but both of us were able to have a conversation about what is possible and what the potential pitfalls could be for that. It's interesting to think about that from a cultural point of view.
Yeah, I used to teach English in Japan, and it's interesting in that I saw that in the classroom that there just no one ever wants to speak up or stand out. And even if you ask someone a direct question, they maybe just won't answer you. But if they're in a group, they'll answer the question collectively. And what's interesting, another interesting aspect of that is that most of the people in Japan are quite conformist, but those that aren't tend to be extremely creative. Like they just fall out of the system. I know some really, really like video games came from Japan. Think about all the stuff that they've invented.
Yeah.
And I knew some really cool musicians that were just not really, conforming to the system. And he was amazing, this talented singer-songwriter. And so I wonder if like that would somehow create even more creativity by making people more conformist because the people that fall out of that system are more creative. I don't know.
Yeah. I think that those who conform almost give up their creativity. It's almost like you have to get rid of creativity to conform because creativity is being different. Creativity is having the freedom to think and see the world in a different way. And if you become that which conforms, then you've just taken your blind. It seems to me, I don't mean that to be a pejorative, but it seems like it is to me. Maybe that's just the way I was built, or maybe that's because I have had a lot of instances where I hate authority and I've had to rebel against it. And I feel like it is crushing. I don't know if that's an innate thing or something we learn along the way, or that's the Western culture or in our DNA. Maybe it's something, I don't know.
Yeah. Hold on. cut out for a second.
Yeah, kind of slipping.
I guess I would be more comfortable with authority if I thought the authority had an authority.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. I despise authority because, like you said, they're full of shit. They don't know. No one knows better. I can read the same source material and I can read the same ideas about things that other people can. You know, and can I share a quick story with you about authority? So when after my first child had died, it was a pretty traumatic experience. And my wife's second pregnancy, we went to the doctor and we were deemed a high risk pregnancy. So we had to go through all these extra bells and whistles. And when it came time, a month before the pregnancy, my wife's doctor, she says, okay, you know what, guys, we're going to go ahead and take the baby early. And I says, oh, why? And she goes, what do you mean, why? And I got kind of offended. I'm like, I mean, why are we taking the baby early? Why are you doing this? Isn't the last month the time in which the majority of brain cells are born? And can't you look at the literature and see that children that are taken premature tend to be like 10 IQ points less than the babies that aren't? And she's like, yeah, I can see that, George. But do you know what happened to your last child? I want to fucking strangle her. I'm like, yeah, I was there. I was there. And do you know what? Like, why did my child die? And she just looked at me. She goes, well, we don't know why. I'm like, then why did you ask me that question? Like, why would you ask me that? Like, you don't know, but then you sit here and ask me and you want to take my child when you know it's going to potentially lead to having a worse life? Like, what's wrong with you? Why would you do that? That's what I'm asking you. And she's like, well, George, we just want to make sure that doesn't happen again. I'm like, well, how are you going to do that? That's what I'm asking. I'm trying not to get mad and like lash out because I want to know what she has to say. Like, well, how do we know that's going to solve it? How do we know? She's like, well, we don't know. And I'm like, then why would we do it? Why? And like that was the authority that like I could see her standing over me and just looking down at me like, you big dummy, you don't know anything. I'm a doctor. And we got to take your kid early because your child died last time. And I'm like, that makes zero sense. That makes no sense
Yeah.
at all. You want to do it. And then it hit me. Oh, you feel guilty as a doctor. So you want to make sure it doesn't happen. You don't give a shit about me or my wife. You don't want that on
Yeah.
your conscience. And like, I had gotten like 3 other opinions and talked to other people, and they're like, you know what, George, we don't know what happened. There's the doctor just wants to do that because of her own reasons, and there's no. I'm like, what are the chances of something like that happening again? And they're like, we can't tell you. We don't know. 0, 80. We don't know. There's no reason it should. But like, it's been that struggle with authority, and for me, that was just like that was it for me. Even, I mean, through high school and stuff, I hated authority, but for me, that was it. I'm like, you know what? Never again. I don't care what doctor or what judge. I can read the same source material and come up with my own ideas. And I feel much better about the outcome, even if it's a negative outcome. At least it was my decision to do it instead of relying on some authority figure who, is just, it kills me, man. It kills me to think about.
At this point, I'm ready for AI to be the authority. It's like it sucks. It's scary as shit, but at least I know they're not motivated by ego and other greed factors. Because like, okay, we need to have government, I guess, but I would be much more comfortable with government if I thought that they were answering to some authority that was not motivated by greed or ego.
Yeah. How do you
And we've
see
never
the
had
AI
that.
future? Yeah. Do you think that's like, what about the programmers? Isn't AI only as good as the people that program it?
Yeah, at the end of the day, there's still a human touch, I suppose. So we'll probably never have this infallible judge. So if we can't have it, and let's get rid of all. just,
Yeah.
just like do our own thing.
I kind of feel sometimes like that's where we're at. Like I saw a really good interview between Brett Weins or one of the Weinstein brothers and Peter Thiel. And what they were saying in that interview was Peter Thiel said that, if you look around your room, the only thing that's changed in the last 50 years is the screen in there. So if you took out your phone, your iPad, your tablet, your computer, your TV, that room would be essentially the same as it was 50 years ago. And further in that conversation, he said the problem with the future is technology never showed up. And this is coming from Peter Thiel. Because the problem is technology never showed up. We bet the farm, all the nation states, the politicians, the big companies, the investment funds, the retirement funds, they bet the farm on automation and technology and all these big tech companies, but never showed up. And so now we're sitting around like, okay, guess that didn't pan out. Like there's, when we were little, we saw the Jetsons. Like we're supposed to live in the sky pad apartments and have flying cars. 20 years ago, we were supposed to have self-driving trucks. And like we always have the answer to all our problems is 5 years away, and then next year
Yeah.
it'll be 5 more years away. It never shows up. And if you look at the world erupting into a chaotic mess of populism or an outbreak of freedom, however you want to describe it, it seems to me that the money's been changed. It's changed hands. It's gone to the people that said they could do it, and they haven't delivered. And I don't see them delivering. I don't see AI coming. I don't see automation coming. I don't see the robot flipping burgers at the burger joint. Like I don't see the technology anywhere. Maybe it is, but maybe it's in bombs or swarming mosquito drones. But I don't see it. I don't see it in my neighborhood.
Have you seen the robot attack dogs?
I have seen those.
You
They
see the one with a rifle on its back shooting at targets?
Where was that at?
I don't know. I saw it last week.
I
Boston
did.
Dynamics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who like what's going on? Like who are these guys? Like
I don't
who
know.
is
It's like a George Orwell quote: "The future of humanity is a boot stepping on a human face." That's the kind of
yeah.
I get when I see that.
Yeah. Yeah, we have all these weapons of war. Here's like a little side rabbit hole to talk about.
Sorry, we lost connection.
Oh, how about now? Can you see me now?
Yeah, good.
Okay. Are you good on time? Are you okay for a minute?
I'm good for a little bit more. Yeah.
Okay. Let me just take you down this little side rabbit hole right here. Who do you think are the kids? Do you think the people, some of the lead scientists today, may be the children of Operation Paperclip?
Which one was that? I don't remember.
So Operation Paperclip was when we brought over like all the Nazi doctors,
Oh
like
yeah, the USS founding, right?
Werner von Braun, like all the people that lead like the Space Institute and like all these different scientists out there that like, they pretty much run NASA and stuff. Like like I don't know. It just makes me wonder, like, if those were the scientists that came over and developed everything, no wonder we have Boston Dynamics. No wonder we have all these crazy robots and automated space weapons and stuff like that. It's crazy.
Yeah. I don't know. I think total control is a goal. So I mean, right now we're in that moment. Like, how much fight do we have in us, or are we just going to let it happen? Maybe there's no fighting it. Maybe total control and total transparency is the future. My concern is that it's transparency for the many, but not the few.
Yeah. I was talking to this guy Benjamin George yesterday, and he told me that what he sees coming down the pipe is like the end of the nation state. And if you look at the way in which corporations already rule the world,
Mhm.
they have the interlocking board of directors. They pretty much have a pretty firm grip on at least trade in a lot of areas. And they're able to
Mhm.
sidestep the government regulations by moving their accounting to Ireland, and they're being protected by the United States, and really finding a way to finesse the laws of every country. And he says that the nation state is slowly becoming irrelevant. And what you're seeing is pretty soon you'll be able to you'll get the company dollar that's good at the company store, be it an Apple dollar or a Google dollar. And, there's little Google cities here and Apple cities there. It's kind of an interesting thought.
Yeah, I mean, the foundation is for sure being laid as we speak, and we see it in a few different areas already. So one is that what you mentioned, or what Benjamin George mentioned. And there's, for example, if you're following the WHO treaty vote of a few weeks ago, there was, you have, right?
I fill me in. I'm not familiar with a lot of those. No.
I think it was a month or two ago. The WHO wanted to revise its treaty with all of the member nations, in which the WHO would their decrees would overrule the sovereignty of each nation in terms of any health crisis or outbreak. And there was, so anytime they say pandemic, well, then the WHO can just do what they want to the people, and the country has no say anymore. And there was a huge kind of upswell of rebellion against this, and it ended up failing. And there was a lot of people that signed on from each countries to say, no, stop here. So, but they've tried it already, and they're going to keep trying it.
Right.
And so the WHO may be one arm of this new one world government that they're trying to make. Another arm of it is already happening in the realm of tax. So I think right now it's limited to the EU, but they're proposing a global or EU level minimum tax. And the reason I'm aware of this is because I'm a national of Switzerland and I'm keyed into the tax industry there. And Switzerland has been known for having preferable tax rates for people and businesses to attract business, and it's good for business. And so there's a huge discussion in Switzerland now because they're apparently decided to comply with this minimum tax rate. So they're trying to figure out how to balance that with the needs of the country. And I think they've agreed to do it. And then I think now it means there's a 15% minimum tax in this zone, which maybe is just Europe, or will probably expand. And we know what happens with taxes over time. They almost never go down, right? The 15% minimum is going to be 18 and then 20 and then 25 eventually. So that's one other area. And what was the third one? Oh, central bank digital currencies are coming. And this isn't my information, but I'm keyed into some people in the crypto space that are very well networked to governments at all levels and banks and so forth. And what he's telling me all the time, he's like, the crypto space is going to be destroyed eventually, except for a few regulated country-backed digital currencies, CBDCs they call them. They're already working on them. A lot of the exchanges are going to be banned, in his opinion, from trading anything but these currencies. Crypto will exist outside of these currencies, but it'll be black market. You won't be allowed to use them to buy anything. And once they get rid of cash, you will only be allowed to use these to purchase things, and they will have a complete, transparent overview of everything that you buy. And it will be, I mean, you've seen these movies that kind of predict this. Like, if you've seen movies from the future where they're walking around, I don't know if it's, what was it, Will Smith movie, like iRobot, where I think it's one of them, got like a chip in his hand and it shows his credits, and every time he buys a beer, he just scans his hand or something. They are working on that. There's already technology that they can implant in your hand that has your credit balance. So it will be complete control of what you do, what you spend. The World Economic Forum just happened a few weeks ago, and I forget who was speaking, but he's like, yeah, we're going to have a system where people can control, or they can see how much their carbon footprint is. So all this is going to be implemented under the guise of the world of climate change, of carbon footprint. And every good is going to be associated with a carbon footprint. And if you spend too much, they're going to just shut you off. They're going to be like, nope, you exceeded your credits. No more carbon footprint for you for this month. They will have that ability if this happens.
Man,
so they don't necessarily need to create like a government. They can do it piecemeal through all of these different mechanisms. And that to me is the most terrifying thing, because the more, this is what was my focus in economics, was the area of institutional economics and the idea of voting with your feet. And the less ability you have to vote with your feet, the less freedom you have. So the more, like the more effort it takes to exit a jurisdiction, the less freedom you have, right? So in the US, initially, states had more power. By and large, the federal power has taken over the states. So if you want to go to a jurisdiction where they have vastly different laws or taxes, you've got to leave the US. But what happens when that government is the world? There's no place for you to go.
Yeah, there's nowhere to run.
Nope. Can't vote with your feet anymore. You're stuck there.
Yeah.
And then so what I think is going to happen is we will probably have something like that, but we'll just have all of these like, and I guess the counter argument to saying, this is good for people because in the old times we had tribes, we had nation states, we had these bands of whatever that were constantly at war with each other. So to create a bigger government means more peace in the end. And it probably will, because there won't be direct conflict between sovereign nations, but you're going to have more and more of these like regional disputes. You're going to have more civil wars of like these little uprisings that's going to be quashed by whatever the global army is. And that's kind of my dystopian view of the world right now, unless things change.
Yeah, it makes sense. I could see it. It's like a Minority Report. If
Yeah.
you can have smaller and smaller groups, they're easier and easier to squash. And look at
Yeah, and then you see the censorship, right? They're already censoring dissent, and they're kind of like probably flagging people that I've been banned from LinkedIn a couple times because of some things I said and brought back. And there's something. The other scary thing I saw is that I think it was some senator of the U.S. warning about the ability to create DNA customized bioweapons in the future.
wow.
So they're going to be able to create a virus that's just for George Monty. And another thing I saw is with these COVID swabs, that when people have to take the PCR tests, it's estimated that 10% of all the swabs taken were sold to other DNA companies to like collect. So you can imagine a future where like not only are you can't say certain things, but if you're too uppity, they can destroy your social credit. They can stop you from spending. And in the worst case, they've got your DNA in file. They can just have someone sneeze on you and kill you off.
Yeah.
Like that's crazy to think about.
Yeah, I mean, like what's 23andMe? Like they've been doing it for years. That's
I did it. Like I didn't know what I was doing. I was like, oh,
I
this is
know, me
cool.
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess on some levels, personalized medicine may hold the power for longevity, but I mean, is it promising or is it suffering? Do you really want to be alive? It's crazy to think about, man. Well, Kevin, I'm having an absolute blast, man. I got to get down and hang out with the fam a little bit. I'm sure you got some things you got to handle, but this is awesome, man. I'm really thankful to get to spend time with you and talk to you. And, we can make it hopefully we can make it a weekly thing where we can find a day to carve out and just, continue to solve the world's problems for everybody.
Thanks again for having me. And it's already the last one we did already resulted in a couple book sales. So people reach out and they said, hey, I saw your interview and I want to get your book. Great.
Yeah.
So thanks to you.
Yeah. Well, that's the power of networking. I'm so thankful, man. I got to share this with you, man. Like I have had an incredible 28 days, man. Like my YouTube channel, I went from having like 200 subscribers to having 5,000 subscribers and picking up like 150 a day. I went from listen to this number. Like I went from having like 10,000 views to 3.8 million, and I'll have 4 million by tomorrow. Dude, it's just, dude, I'm so stoked. And even in here, like the majority, I started posting just some different comic videos and a lot of shorts and stuff like that, and it just started taking off. And I have seen the bridge between some of the comedy that I've been posting and some of the long form format that I've been posting. So I'm super excited and I'm super thankful to have had you here to help build this and make this better, because I really enjoy talking to you, and I think the audience enjoys talking to you as well. So thank you for that. And thanks for letting me share that.
Thanks, brother. Yeah.
Okay, man. Yep.
All right. Enjoy your time with
brother. We'll talk to you soon, man. Okay.
All right, man.
All right.
See ya.
Aloha.